So here is an example of these sedimentary rocks that should be in your kit. So I have them separated here. These are considered the detrital or clastic sedimentary rocks. So if you look at this one right here, you can see that the individual grains that go into making up this sedimentary rock, they're pretty rounded. Again, I'm not looking at the rock itself, I'm looking at the grains that make up this conglomerate in this case. It's poorly sorted because the grains vary in size between gravels and sands, and there's probably some silt-sized particles that are holding everything together in places. And these grains are rounded, and so that's what tells you that it's a conglomerate, because you have poorly sorted, well-rounded class. That's what separates it from a breccia, which say looks something like this. You have chunky, blocky, angular pieces in it. Next, if we're going down in grain size, we have a sandstone, and so if I pick it up and I kind of run my fingers across it, it feels like maybe 320 grit sandpaper. So you're trying to feel, in this case it's a fine sandpaper, but it still feels like sand particles, so that would make it a sandstone. And when you think about, if you can't really tell, or you're wondering what the shape of the grains are and what the sorting is, think, is it easier to pack a bunch of marbles into a jar or a bunch of dice? So if the marbles are all nice and smooth and rounded, you can pack more in, as opposed to blocky, angular dice that, unless you're situating them perfectly, that's just going to be haphazard. So you try and get the most packed into the smallest space, so you have everything nice and rounded and smooth. And so that's the case for this. And lastly, for a siltstone, if you feel it doesn't feel quite as sandy or as gritty as the sandstone. It feels a little bit more smooth because it contains mostly silt-sized particles. So if we're going down in grain size, we have our gravels, we have our sands, we have our silts, okay? And then when it comes to maybe your chemical sedimentary rocks, remember, we're not so much looking at texture as much as we're looking at the composition, or determining the composition. So I got my little bottle of acid here, and if I drop the acid on here, you can see that it starts to fizz and really react. So you might want to, if you have some vinegar, drop it on the samples and see if anything happens. If it doesn't, maybe scrape up a little bit of the rock so that it powders, and that might make it easier to fizz. If I had my glass plate out here, I might see if this scratched glass. And then with this one, I can scratch it with my fingernail, so that tells me that this is my rock gypsum. Okay.